In the previous sessions, we discussed about how the reasons for formation of global situations, that is the process of globalization within urban areas in Indian context. Then we discussed also on how globalization has evolved over a period of time in Indian cities, and we arrived at we saw till what happened till this post liberalization cities. So now we will continue from the here on discussing how the characteristics of post liberalization cities were formed and the reasons behind this, the main characteristics of post liberalization cities, the effects uh, of the economy change and other aspects, and the political, the social and other aspects. So let us continue now. Characteristics of post liberalization cities. As we discussed, during the 1990s, there were two major things which happened in the world and in Indian context. One is the rapid development of information technology, which helped people to communicate than ever before. People were able to communicate for long distances with very less time and problems. So, therefore, what happened is that this integration of various parts of the globe was very much easily possible. So, this reduced the issues earlier of in terms of how globalization spread, and now it was much faster kind of integration with across the globe was much possible. So, this had also major impact in Indian context, and the way the information technology revolutionized development. And another important factor is also that there was this economic liberalization or the economic opening of economy to global investments, and therefore, the kind of what kind of development will happen in Indian context. So, these were the two major things of how it went on to characterize what would be the post liberalization city. So, this was not just only the Indian context where this post liberalization happened, it was happening in whole lot of countries, and there was this whole lot of this sweep of global homogenization which is happening and which is still happening. So, here let us see further the conditions which led to it. So, during the 1990s, there was a major structural changes in post liberalization economy. So, the structural changes here meant that the influence of global companies led to kind of contribution of various sectors of economy onto the economy of the country. So, by 9% on services sector during this period, which includes telecom, banking, financial and computer software, construction and transportation. By 2010, the figure is around 66%. So, that means you can see the entire flipover of how manufacturing sector was at the prime, whereas that structurally that changed to services sector, which got the highest inflow of investments from global flows. At the same time, it is important to also understand how the economy and therefore the Indian urban situations changed by the effect of informal economy and informal developments. So, this is a very familiar picture in Indian context in the contemporary situation. If we see the reasons behind why these has evolved, one is that there was a whole lot of this shift from manufacturing sector, the decline of manufacturing sector. Therefore, people lost jobs and people slowly shifted to the services sectors. So, here that means when the low skilled labor who used to work in the manufacturing sector, when the industries got closed, which were industries which were located within the urban areas got closed, these whole lot of the low skilled labor lost their jobs, and they were looking for some kind of an alternate way of finding them in a job. So, this led to this whole lot of development of this informal sector. At the same time, there was also this whole lot of this migration which was happening from the urban to from the rural to urban areas, where they were trying to find housing within the urban areas and trying to find jobs. So, this they were trying to informal means of getting a job was an easier way of getting accommodated. So, and there was another thing is this next after that is this the global influence. So, what this global influence and this when these multinational companies came into these urban areas, they came with huge capital. When they came with this huge capital, they needed services also. They couldn't set up everything exclusive of themselves. They needed whole lot of support services which can be provided. So, here is where the informal economy, informal sector came up to the level that it started serving the formal global sectors, global entities. This created this attraction because of the high value of money which is coming into the global through this global enterprise. At the same time, this attraction from the informal. So, this is the resultant what we see in today's context. This juxtaposition of contrasting conditions of informal and formal, and informal has a major role to play in today's context. So, this is the example of a current urban situation where increasing structural and spatial divisions or at the high levels, and there is a there visibly the disparities are very apparent. So, what we see here in this image is a Mumbai city, where this whole lot of this global companies which has come up with their setups of global office spaces, whereas there is a whole lot of real estate development around creating this kind of high end buildings where this whole lot of their managers and professionals are getting housed. And at the same time, you will see this kind of the old chawl structures which used to be part of the manufacturing, the earlier manufacturing sector housing, which is still coexisting. So, this is the kind of a typical condition of for a city like Mumbai, where this multiple layers of these things are coexisting. So, as we discussed, there is this a whole lot of polarization and disparity which is happening between the various groups and communities who are living in these areas, and there is also a kind of interdependency between them. So, as we saw in the previous slide, there is this whole kind of distinct economic sections of the society who are living in close proximity. At the same time, they have a major kind of polarization among them. So, let us see how they are interdependent, how this interdependency work in between them. So, here if we see among the elites, the local forms of social solidarity is of increasingly less important, and their urban realm becomes mostly non-spatial, whereas for the poor and the vulnerable, their spatially defined neighborhoods are increasingly more important for their existence. So, as you see, so this is the, if you see this some kind of this area which is elite neighborhood, the people who are living here, they increasingly not having relationships which are spatial. Their kind of social solidarity is not much related to the spatial of what is happening around, whereas this kind of kind of spontaneous settlements of the poorer sections, where the way they organize themselves, they form social networks, and they how they group themselves are very important for the way how they find jobs in the city and how they succeed by in the city by helping each other. So this is what the in this condition is quite well argued by Saskia Sassen. She says socioeconomic symbiosis within the polarized city, where rich and the poor, those included and excluded from the formal economy, are dependent on each other. The interdependency exists even while their spatial patterns may or may not characterize the mix. So, the spatial pattern in which this works, the way this different communities, how they live together, may reflect how the interdependency works or may not work as well. So, this is it is also important to see how the urban areas because of the global influences are going through major restructuring, the spatial restructuring. So, as we saw in the previous section, how the globally connected elite and the population which is more having this global connections are existing with the more the local or the indigenous systems of settlements which coexist. At the same time, let us look at how this restructuring happening at the urban area level and at the region level. So, this is an collection of this maps of cities, the abstract of cities, where how the earlier centers used to be and how these new centers are evolving. So, it is very interesting to see it is consistently the new global centers where the global companies are getting located and their professionals or the employees who are working in these global companies are getting located, or consistently you will see there is a kind of restructuring happening where this center, they form alternate centers around the outside the peripheries of the cities, and they form new centers where they can develop their whole lot of sort of agglomeration of activities around them and their residential areas. It is a very interesting that how this restructuring at the periphery is also linked to how the real estate also. So, if you see most of the these areas are also kind of having a lesser the cost of land comparing to this existing urban centers. So, if you see in the case of Chennai, the whole the IT corridor and the old Mahabalipuram road, and where all these IT companies started locating themselves in outside the city, and it has evolved as a major center of job opportunities for these global activities. Whereas in Hyderabad we can see this Hyderabad and other areas, and Pune, Hinjawadi area. In Bangalore, it's been very distinctly this development of Whitefield, Electronic City, and their extensions and the areas between them. Whereas in Mumbai condition, where we could see this as this creation of Bandra Kurla complex, and then the other emerging Malad new CBDs. So, these are also in a way that shifting of this center, the earlier notion of center to the lesser expensive areas and peripheries. So, these what it is actually visually seen, this is very interesting to see how these eruptions of building activity happening in this restructured new centers. So, here this is a cityscape of Hyderabad, where this huge development is happening in the landscape of how the developments used to happen before, and this is it's a kind of new way of built form is evolving, and the new form of organizing themselves is evolving, and how they are restructuring the urban conditions. So the situation is very similar in Bangalore, where we see this is the example of this global companies locating midst of this neighborhoods, and how they erupt as a major subcenter. And the very similar situation in Chennai, what we can see here. And there is another this is the photograph shows very interesting of how this new center has located in the peripheral landscape on the of the city. Here you can see a whole lot of this informal kind of settlements are evolving, and a whole lot of infrastructure is not in place. You don't have roads, and there is a whole lot of, still there is a kind of the character of the periphery is still there, but at the same time you have this huge workspaces of companies who are related to this global flows, and they are making their the centers where all their offices are getting located, and they're surrounded by supporting facilities and residential areas. Similar condition in Gurgaon. This huge eruptions of Gurgaon is an excellent example of how this globalization and the development of Gurgaon and this companies coming to base their locations away from Delhi, and how they are developing in a large scale. So let's see how this happened in through the Google Earth images, how this happened over this period. So if you see here, this is a site of Bangalore Whitefield. In 2004, it used to be an area like this. This Whitefield area was a kind of industrial area which was developed by the government to accommodate manufacturing industries, but which did not happen. I mean, many of the manufacturing industries did not come here. Very few industries were there. It was a vacant land, and with some infrastructure, and it was just close to the city as well. So that is where, then this is what happened in 2014. If we see this image and carefully see the difference between what it was in 2004 and 2014. So you can see there is this whole lot of major development activity which has kind of happened within this short 1 decade of time, where all these are actually the companies headquarters, or global companies who are working outsourced jobs from the Western nations and other global places. So therefore these companies, they are forming a kind of agglomeration. Why do they are all connected by information infrastructure, telecommunication facilities, but still they kind of agglomerate to locate themselves. There is they have this they get this entire kind of supporting facilities which kind of kind of helps each other, shared sense of place, and also it creates a kind of agglomeration effect of creating being a image. It's so called the Silicon Valley of India kind of situation. So here we will also, you will also note that this whole lot of this kind of gated communities kind of activities are also coming, where people are for the professionals and people who are living work with these global companies. So let's take this one area and to see, if you see blow up in detail. This was what in 2004 it was. As I said, there were these small villages, and there was this some industries which are not really functioning much, and there was this there were also some planned areas and some infrastructure systems. And what happened is, this is what happened in 2014, where you can see that whole lot of development of this exclusive enclaves of economic activities and residential areas happened in patches. So while the existing villages also grew because of this entire activity, because the whole lot of construction workers were getting located in this pre-existed villages, and these villages started acting as providing services for the simple services like for household support and domestic help and things like that, for these new developments while it is still developing. So it is very important to see this kind of this gated communities. These are which have evolved as a over having some kind of exclusive neighborhoods with kind of more or less totalized complete facilities within themselves, though they claim to be complete. They may not be really complete, but they claim to create this bubbles of exclusive spaces with the facilities. Let's see this how this is creating some kind of social and a different how these gated communities in creating a social disruption in the systems which pre-existed. So if we see this image, you will see that this is in 2009 in a peripheral area of Bangalore. These were these little small villages. In between there was this agriculture, which is partly some based on the water resources availability. This farming was going on. Within 5 years you see this kind of gated communities which has evolved within this short period. These are influenced by investments from the global investors. They would kind of it's a kind of making one is to make housing supply to the global population. Say for example, it can maybe even non-residential Indians who want to invest in Indian context, and versus, and also there is a whole lot of this global companies which need their professionals want to be housed. So this shows what happened is that when these gated communities come into these areas, they create so much of exclusivity to themselves, and they kind of wall in themselves. Okay, therefore they wall outside also, they wall out others, and they wall in themselves. Therefore they are creating a system of exclusivity. Okay, but at the same time they are not able to they are not actually complete in their own sense, because they need a whole lot of support services activities in the form of say the domestic help or maintenance personnel and this kind of people. So what happens is these villages become the places where this kind of support people do serve these gated communities. So what happens is that there was a social structure which pre-existed in this place, which was having a certain character. Now that has disrupted. The same people who used to do farming in those areas are becoming kind of domestic help or personnel who work on doing some maintenance in these areas. So this has really kind of disturbed, I would say, the social structure which used to exist in this place. It is very important to understand this, to be to sensitive to look at what kind of development do we want. What kind of expansion do we want in our cities? Is this the way of expansion? Is this the way way of disrupting the social condition? Is this a good way to of expansion? It's a question. So similarly, you will also see in within the cities, you will see there is a whole lot of activities which are becoming redundant. So as we discussed that there was this manufacturing sector which got declined and the services sector went up. So but when the manufacturing sector declined, there was this whole lot of industries which existed within the urban areas were also becoming redundant. So then this is a kind of existing development which has happened in the same place when the industries were in 2002. It has become a kind of an special exclusive enclave where each houses offices, huge commercial areas, entertainment spaces, and also exclusive housing areas. It is very important to understand that while we say that these are not it is very important to understand that it is not the position that these are not the way to do the redevelopment. It doesn't, I am not meaning that this is not the way, it's not that the redevelopment should not happen, but at the same time the way this exclusivity of these areas, how all these facilities or all these developments are focusing towards a certain high end kind of community and upper middle class kind of community, and it kinds of keeps out the whole section of the economically weaker sections. That is creating a kind of a section, kind of, these are the kind of exclusion they create, is creating these islands of exclusion, and that is disturbing the current social system of Indian cities. So this means how it looks in these spaces. This is the kind of space, only if you see it as a see through this angle of understanding what is the social change it is providing, this kind of this production of this kind of spaces, what is the kind of social change it is creating, only then one will understand the impact of this. So this kind of commercial and high end residential spaces got totally kind of huge islands of these spaces are created in the cities. This kind of public spaces which are produced, which are more related to the commercial and these activities, and contribute less to actual interaction between the all types of public, all types of population of the areas cannot come here. It's also important to see how this process is happening. So the current development is actually driven by the bank credit. So if you see the flow of bank credits actually supports the way the kind of cities are expanding. So when people have this kind of the global people of these global companies, when they the professionals, when they earn more than or slightly more than the other sections of the population, they have this immediate surplus of fund which they can invest. So the banks and the real estate market understands this as a great opportunity. So therefore they develop this kind of, get into this mass production kind of housing development, and which is literally changing the landscape of cities in current context. So this is an excellent example of how this earlier system of building houses and how this new this kind of mass production of housing, which is supported by the bank credit, is changing the landscape of Indian cities and their expansion. It is also very important to understand the role of banks here. By giving funding, banks are also able to indirectly control or indirectly kind of control the way what kind of built form they would want to the support. So when bank credit is given to certain kind of built form, certain kind of builders and the real estate supply, then that really creates a whole lot of kind of changes in the way the urban expansion happens in totality. It's at the same time, it is also, while we say that this whole lot of globally linked economy and it's the housing related to it and how the commercial activities are happening, at the same time we will see here that cities are also concentration of diverse culture and poverty within the widening gap. Cities are also places where huge concentration of diverse cultures, where the whole lot of this people who are coming to the urban condition and trying to make their living along with this global influenced economies. So here this is an example of how this whole lot of this informal settlements who live in a very vulnerable situations, in developed through their own organic systems, and how they try to this concentration of these things happen along with this influence. Here, as Saskia Sassen says, global cities are not only great concentrations of corporate power, but also great concentration of diverse cultures and poverty. These disparities are as seen as lived between the urban glamour zone and urban war zone have become enormous. The extreme visibility of the differences is likely to contribute to further brutalization of the conflicts, the indifferences and greed of the new elites versus the hopelessness and rage of the poor. So this is further discussed by many other sociologists, urban sociologists who are trying to say how the urban systems are coexisting. As David Harvey said, that there is this process which is going on about accumulation due to dispossession. So here you will see this system of agriculture, and there is this vulnerable areas within the urban areas, especially the agricultural areas, the peripheries, vulnerable industry, I mean the redundant industries, and of course the slums and organic develops in existing areas. So these are kind of approached by the land assemblers in the local market, and they do the speculation, and therefore they try to get global investors into this, and therefore they form developers, and then these developers approach banks to get the funding, and they again speculate, the banks also again speculate, and therefore they form this dizzying height of high real estate prices. And this high real estate prices is not a place for able to afford by the average city dweller. He also tries to get funding from the banks, and he is also not able to find the fundings. His burden of interest and tax and interest of the loans, he is not able to find place within the city, and he has to shift to the peripheral areas. Therefore, whereas also these agriculture and vulnerable population and economies are also peripheralized. This is the way of accumulation happening due to dispossession. So till now we saw what is the characteristics of global cities, of this post liberalization global cities. And in the next session we will discuss about what is the characteristics of this global sites where this actual global companies and this activities gets located. Thank you.